Have you ever tasted wine blind? I don't mean by wearing a blindfold or by drinking so much wine that you lost your vision. Rather, it's kind of like taking the Pepsi challenge. And it could really open your eyes about what wines you like and help you explore wines beyond your comfort level. Listen up to find out how and why you should taste wines blind. This is the Inside Wine Podcast. I'm Joe Janish, a certified specialist of wine and wine industry professional since 1996, giving you insider tips to make the right wine decisions. And today our guest is Marika Vida, a sommelier and owner of the Mom Somm. And she has some outstanding insights that we're going to talk about today. Marika, welcome to the Inside Wine Podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Well, we've been working on this for a while, and Eureka, we've got Marika. This is great. So, Marika, you have been in the wine business and serving wine to people for a very long time. I don't mean to say that in a way you did start when you were around 10 or 11 years old, working for the Ritz and other places. Just really quickly, give us like the elevator pitch on Marika Vida.
Oh, long time is correct. I am definitely an older sommelier, or as we all like to call ourselves these days, an elder. I'm an elder.
You're experienced.
I started working in restaurants when I was 14 in Toronto, where I'm from. And over the course of 37 years, have done many different things in the wine business, but mostly known for my 13 years at the Ritz Carlton, both in Philadelphia and mostly in Central Park, New York, as the wine director. And then started my own consulting business and kind of did that while I was still consulting for the Ritz. And how I always had this saying about what do you want your life to look like? And I'm very grateful for my time at the Ritz and for all that I learned. But the restaurant business, the hotel business is full of minutia and a lot of things that, like things like doing inventory and updating a wine list at 3 a.m. And these are all really necessary things, but these weren't things that I particularly got a lot of joy out of. So the goal was to find a way to do more of what I loved doing and less of what I didn't like. And that's where the consulting company came in.
And what was the part of being in the restaurant business that you really loved?
People. I really loved engaging with the guests. I loved educating the staff on wine. I particularly loved doing wine dinners. That was something that was a big part of when I turned from being an employee at the Ritz to a consultant. I really focused on PR for them. So my game kind of changed, and I did a wine dinner series that was ridiculously successful. And I honestly didn't expect it to be, because most of the times you're praying that people show up at your wine dinners. That wasn't the case with this. People, they would sell out, and they did very well. And they were, particularly, it was based on women. It was called Phenomenal Femmes. And so I did over 40 dinners with very prominent female winemakers and winery owners, and it was a blast. I really enjoyed doing that. And so when I finally left the Ritz, I realized that, doing this kind of dog and pony is a talent, and people need that. People need somebody that can communicate that way in front of guests and also do staff training. So I started getting kind of brand ambassadorial gigs that allowed me to do what I loved. And I didn't have to do inventory anymore, which was a bonus.
Yeah, that's nice. I've also been in public relations and marketing for over 20 years, and events are generally not fun if you're on the side of putting on the event. But one thing that I have to agree with you, like wine dinners, pretty fun for almost everybody involved on both sides. It's one of those special magical things. And if our listener has not ever participated in a wine dinner, it's a great opportunity to just enjoy food, enjoy wine, learn about wine from the people who made it. It's such a great opportunity.
I agree. And I think, it's just like anything, Joe, they have to be done right.
Right.
I've been to a lot of bad ones. And not that they're, ultimately they're still fun. You're eating and drinking, right? But I mean,
What
in
can go
terms
wrong?
of, the person hosting really has to know how to read a crowd
Yes.
and who wants to be engaged and who doesn't. There are people there that really just don't want to be bothered. They don't want you coming to their table. And, years of working on the floor and just honestly working in the hospitality business trains you for that.
And more toward the education part of wine, which is what you do so well and why I brought you on today. One of the really great ways of learning about wine, and you are a big supporter of this, I know, is tasting wines blind. And that's what we want to talk about today, because I know this is right in your wheelhouse. When I first started in the wine business, there was so much to learn and so much to taste, and I didn't even know where to start. And I was lucky enough to have a master of wine as my mentor, Roger Baumrick.
Oh, great guy.
Yeah, awesome guy. And everything kind of crystallized when he sat me down and we did a blind tasting. And I was like, oh, now I get it. And now I can kind of start to understand this. So I know you're big on this too. So I want to just get your perspective and your ideas on how tasting wines blind can help our listener really get a better understanding. What just occurred to me, our listener may not really realize what blind tasting is. And it's not closing your eyes necessarily.
Right.
And it's not blindfolding. Maybe we could really quickly, you could talk about what a blind tasting actually is and how you would perform one. If you wanted to do one at home as for maybe a wine tasting party or something like that.
Absolutely. And they have all kinds of kits and stuff to do this now where you can just, buy the bags but obviously you have to have somebody that knows.
Right. Well, there has to be one person who actually knows what's going in. So that would be you'd be the host, right? Or whoever.
Right.
Yeah.
There's somebody organizing and they know. So it's really a literal term from the standpoint of just not knowing what you're drinking.
Right.
But to your point, yes, you don't have a blindfold on. You can see everything because seeing wine is important too, because it can be a tell as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, if you're looking at something really light bodied as opposed to something really full bodied, that's depending on where your wine experience is, that can be a tell.
Right.
To certain people. So if you wanted to do this at home, again, you'd have that person that would have to know. And essentially you can just do this with numbers, right? You could have all the bottles numbered in bags, or I've even done it with cloths wrapped around and an elastic at the top, this is, or tinfoil. So there's many ways you can hide. The one thing I will say though is the bottle shape can also be a tell.
Yeah, right.
And you can still usually figure that out, right? Even if it's in a bag, but it depends on what kind of a tasting you want to do, right? If there's something where, I talked about single blind and double blind. Single blind is where you know something. So for example, you knew that you were blind tasting a number of white Burgundies, but that's all you knew. All right. But it's a tell. Right? It's giving you something. Double blind is literally knowing nothing. You don't know anything. You don't know red, white, what country, what region, what vintage, nothing. So really, the world is your oyster in terms of creating something like this. So if you're at home and you wanted to do Cabernets from all around the world, and then you assign, but again, that would be a single blind. So people would know that they're Cabernets that you're going to be drinking, and then you're just going to be guessing on where they're from. But that's kind of a real easy, fun thing to do. And you usually get tripped up on that. People think, again, they have certain biases about where something's from and that it will be better.
Or the price point, right?
Yeah. And it's, and you also want to, this is important, you want to compare apples to apples. So if you would put a range down between $25 and $35 a bottle or less or more, whatever it is, but you want to keep everybody, you want to keep it all in line, because if you're comparing a $10 bottle of wine to a $50 bottle of wine, then we're in apples to oranges.
It's funny you say that, because I'm now remembering another time I did a blind tasting early in my wine career, and it was with Kevin Sbraga in his class.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing champagne. It was the champagne class. And we had just gone through 6 or 7 champagnes that he had poured out. And then he said, "Oh, there's one more champagne that I have relationships with these different suppliers, and this is a new champagne that's coming to the market. We're going to pour it out, and I just want you guys to just taste it, and then we're going to talk about how much the supplier should charge for this. And there's like 100 people in the class, and he's like, "All right, everybody tasted it. Hands up, $200." No hands went up. All right, $150. No hands went up. $100. No hands went up. This went down to 75. At 50, a few people raised their hand. Went down to 40. A lot of the class raised their hand. Went down to 30, and then the rest of the people raised their hand. So he pulled open the bottle out of the bag. It was Dom. It was Dom Perignon, of course.
He does that trick a lot.
Yeah, sneaky. But it opens your eyes, to your point. Like most people be like, "Oh, send over the Dom. I'm gonna bring it over here. Let's have that. Let's celebrate." But in reality, that might not be the champagne that you want the most. Like you might like something better. It has nothing to do with the price or the prestige or the reputation. A lot of it is just what you like, and blind tasting can help you find that.
Absolutely. And it can also be, it's also very hard to ask that question, what should we charge for this? Right.
Right.
Particularly, it's a good question, but it's a hard one because it's super subjective.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? To do something like that, like people can feel really stupid, and you don't want that. That's not fun when people don't feel good. If they they think that a $75 wine to them tastes like $10, like, and then they kind of feel stupid. You don't want to do that, I don't think.
Yeah. And that's why you don't, if you're doing a wine tasting party at home, you can avoid that by saying, this is we have a range here. Stay within the range so that, we're getting a comparable quality.
That's a good tip.
But it's fun. I remember years ago doing one with a group of friends of mine who were at various levels of wine knowledge, if you will. And everybody just assumed that the French wine was going to be the best. Everybody. So they kept, and it came in second to last.
Wow.
Out of 8 wines. And that's not to say that that's indicative of anything, because it could have been just that particular wine or the fact that most people are used to drinking New World, for example. And then if all of a sudden they're having something that's, really earthy and the tannins are stronger and they're not used to that, they're not going to think that maybe that's to their taste because they haven't experimented with that. So that's the other reason to do it, to experiment.
I'm glad you brought up the whole New World, Old World thing, because that's still something for a lot of people. It's a new concept to them or an unknown concept to a lot of, average wine consumers, maybe our listener. And you just reminded me that when I play the blind wine tasting game with, friends in the industry, we always do like this double blind thing where like someone will just pour a glass and hand it over to you, whether we're at a bar or in a restaurant or maybe somewhere else, and be like, the first thing we do is like, all right, New World, Old World. And then like we guess from there. So like the first guess is like, all right, I'll guess New World. And then I'll guess, Argentina. And then I'll guess Malbec. It's kind of like a fun thing that we do, but it kind of helps you also understand, to your point, like what styles of wine that I like or what you would like. You can kind of just all of a sudden break it in half between New World and Old World, because in most cases, although you can be tricked, in most cases, you can kind of put a wine in one of those two categories at the start.
Yeah, you could get warm vintage, warm climate, Old World. Again, when you start getting into that from a variable standpoint, I think it's so interesting that you start with that question when you guys, that's fun, because usually that's the what you deduce, right? After going through, all of the deductive reasoning, if you will, on Old World, New World, real quick for consumer. One thing, it's literal, right? We're talking about Old World countries that have been making wine for hundreds, some thousands of years. All right. And often we can look at that by saying, these are countries with monarchs.
Okay, good.
And then New World, again, literal, has been making wine for as long. And, usually we're under the countries with monarchs. It's just a very literal term when you look at it from an Old World, New World standpoint saying that. But then we get into the style differences. And typically speaking, Old World, earthy, right? Definitely more, earth driven as opposed to New World, fruit forward. New World, generally speaking, higher alcohol because the grapes get more ripe, right? And you can do this at home. You can just turn around, look at the alcohol content on your bottles of wine, right? So if you have a big Napa Cab, and then maybe you're having a left bank Bordeaux, which is usually mostly Cab, because, again, with those blends, you're going to get that. But, look at the alcohol. Just look, and you'll see it's usually at least a percentage lower, typically. So also, there are a lot more laws, old world, much less so in the new world, right? These are just style things, it's a Rolls Royce next to a Ferrari, and there's no right or wrong, but stylistically they're different. And so, yes, it's a term that we love to throw around, old world, new world, but it does mean something.
Yeah. And I think it helps. Again, there are certainly wines from the new world that you might think are from the old world in a blind tasting, but it's a very general way of kind of like figuring out what you like. It'll help you gravitate toward wines. Like, a lot of people will really love the California New World style of Chardonnay, not really like it as much from the old world, maybe Chablis or Burgundy. And it's a stylistic difference. But if you know that you like New World style Chardonnay because you like Napa Chardonnay or Sonoma Chardonnay, you'll probably also like Chardonnay from Australia. You'll probably also like it from, other parts of the Southern Hemisphere. So it can kind of just help you with your exploration into different areas.
It's also, I'm glad, just focusing on Chardonnay for a second, because it can be it can be polarizing, because a lot of people, will sit there and go, I don't like Chardonnay. And I'm like, why? And generally speaking, they'll say to me, because it's buttery, and I'll give them a Chablis and I'll go, do you like this? I love this. Well, this is Chardonnay, right? So this is a great way to educate. I did a blind tasting 101 class at the Charleston Food and Wine Festival last year. That was my last event before COVID in early March of 2020. And we had over 100 people in that room. And it's something I always do. I do an old world and new world Chardonnay. And I make sure that the old world Chardonnay is unoaked, because you can have both. Right?
Right.
You can have Chardonnay from the old world that is also oaked. But it's important to note, Chardonnay is a chameleon grape. It will take on whatever you do to it. And when you don't do a lot to it, it's interesting. It's actually a very neutral grape. It's not super aromatic. It's not something that I'm necessarily always going to nail, like Sauvignon Blanc in a blind tasting, right? But this is for people that say to me, I don't like those buttery Chardonnays. Those two words do not need to go together, right? So when I did that blind tasting, of course I had a Chablis, and I can't remember which Chardonnay I had from the New World, but people were like, there's no way this is the same grape. And I'm like, yes, it is. So, one just doesn't have any makeup.
That's right.
So this is a way to learn. And then all of a sudden, now they have a category of Chardonnay that they can drink, that they like.
Exactly.
And they're like, I didn't know, right? Because the French don't put grape varieties on their labels, right? You have to know
Correct.
by the region.
You have to know Chablis, right? You have to know if it's Chablis or Macon or whatever it is. Yeah, that's so toward that point, if our listener wants to put on a blind tasting wine party, Chardonnay could be a good single blind choice. That would really open up a lot of eyes to get a couple different.
Totally agree. Could not say more. There's so many options there and so many styles.
Yeah. For our listener, if you didn't hear it, we did do an episode a couple episodes back with our friend Chris Dooley, who focused specifically on Chardonnay and the range between what he called the lemon laser water and butterball style. And I thought that was brilliant.
God, he's fabulous. That is great. I'm so stealing that, Dooley.
A little more on putting on your own blind tasting party. A couple of things that I want to ask you, because I think they're important, but maybe you disagree. Do you want to keep controls on the wine? So temperature and vessels.
Great question. So yes, I am a firm believer in this country. We drink our white wines too cold and our red wines too warm, and part of that is because of that term room temperature. because historically room temperature, in medieval times, if you were in a castle,
Yeah, it was 55 degrees.
right? But now it's 73 degrees and that's too warm. It's just too warm
Right.
for red wine. And, so I often in my wine fridge, I keep that at 55, but I'll pull it out. I'll pull out the wine and I let them sit out for a bit. I honestly am anywhere between 63 and 68 degrees on red. And for white wines, anywhere from 42 to 55. All right. And the more high end, like, we mentioned white Burgundy, if you're having a very high end white Burg, that's, you want to get more to, you do not want to be as cold, right? Because then you're not tasting anything. But if you're having really an inexpensive, again, I'll go back to Pinot Grigio, you want that colder. It's better colder. So temperature is important. In terms of vessels, okay, because we're blind tasting, it doesn't really matter because you're keeping it in the bottle. But, good stemware is always important. I'm a big fan of, I have 3 at home other than stemless. I guess call that 4. But I always have a Burgundy glass, a Burgundy bowl, a Bordeaux glass, and an AP, an all-purpose. That's pretty much how I run a restaurant, and that's how I run my home. You don't need to have a glass for every varietal. I don't feel that's necessary, but I feel like those 3 options just kind of cover everything.
I was thinking in terms of if you went to the expense and effort of pouring out the wines ahead of time, almost like the Pepsi challenge. And if you had like 3 glasses in front of each person, you probably want to have the same glasses, right? For each type of wine. I mean, assuming you're having the same varietal, let's say.
So you can get these tasting kit glasses. I remember this so many years ago, my first little tasting kit glasses, it was 6 of them and they all had like a shorter stem. And, this is a great thing to have if you want to be able to taste them all at once. That's not always feasible depending on the size of your party. But if it's a small dinner party, sure. And you can get them in little kits of 6. Either that or lots of people do these O's and stemless now. And if you had 6 stemless in front of you, I know they talk about, well, it can warm up the wine. It can, but the reality is if you're holding that glass above where the wine is, you should be okay.
Yeah. Depending on the temperature of the wine, unless you're like holding it there for like 5 minutes, it's not going to change the temperature all that much.
Right. And it's a tasting amount, right? It's not a full glass.
Right.
So, but you could definitely do that with stemless. Which I see a lot of people have these days in their homes.
I love the stemless because I break stem glasses like,
oh yeah,
well, I
cry.
Like at 5 minutes they're broken, like, and then I get angry.
They're broken and the bowl's totally intact. You want to just kick yourself, right? It's like, yes, I understand. I've so been there.
All right. Any other tips for tasting wine blind?
Just honestly, I really feel like it's endless, your theme topics. Like you could just have so much fun, right? You could do, like, if you're a Bordeaux lover, you could do left bank versus right bank, so that I've done that a gazillion times for corporate clients and they love it because they really do present differently. But again, this is all Bordeaux. Right. So, there's just, it's pretty limitless. Rosé is so hot right now. Rosés all around the world, rosés with more skin contact, orange wines. It's a really, really fun and an easy thing to do. And you could just like put out a cheese plate, some charcuterie so that doesn't, again, not too much stress going on there and have a blast. It's a great way to spend an evening with friends.
Cool. So Marika, thank you so much for this. There was a lot of really good information here for our listener. I know they're going to have a lot of fun and do a blind tasting really soon. You do a lot of work for private clients, corporate clients, groups, things like that. Could you tell our listener how they can get in touch with you if they have any questions or if they want to have you help them with an event of some sort?
Sure. Well, my email is m@marikavida.com. Pretty easy, my name. I'm on Instagram. Now, if you search my name, it'll come up, but I'm under the username the Mom Somm, which I have trademarked. And hopefully something will come of that.
Someday.
No, I just, it's the mom hat and the Somm hat were obviously two very major parts of my life.
Yeah.
Facebook, I'm just my name, Marika Vida. And then Twitter, which I'm least friendly with, I'm Mom Somm and then Marika_Vida. And yes, I do a lot of work for both individuals and corporations, and I do a lot of blind tasting.
Cool. Very good. And listener, if you swipe up, left, right, I'm not sure which way, we'll have all those details in the show notes. Marika, thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Joe. What a pleasure. I'm wishing you a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Marika Vida. We hope you'll soon feel comfortable about attending a wine dinner or some other wine event. It really will be great to be social again, and it'll be great to support your local restaurants. For more about Marika, please check the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please tell a friend. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show, either through your favorite podcast app or by downloading the Wine 365 app in the App Store, so you can get the next episode delivered automatically. In the meantime, visit wine365.com to further enhance your wine knowledge. And remember, wine is food. It comes from a place. Enjoy it responsibly.